Hello folks, I'm finally back out in the garage today on this crisp 15-degree day, and that's Fahrenheit, so well below 0 C. But today I'm going to be taking a look at an inexpensive Chinese MIG welder. I've looked at quite a few cheap stick welders, so I thought I'd mix it up and give a MIG welder a try. This is the Yeswelder MIG 205DS, and it's actually a multifunction machine. This welder can do MIG, stick, and scratch start TIG welding. This review will mostly focus on the MIG welding, especially since this welder didn't actually come with anything to run TIG. So, most people that buy it are probably going to be buying it to run MIG. I'll definitely run some stick rods just to see how it does, but at least in this video, I probably won't try any TIG. This is also a dual voltage machine that can run on 120 volts or 240 volt power. It came with what appears to be a very poorly translated label on the power cord that says, adapting to 220 volt, the welder must need a 2-minute stewing after try to 110 volt. My guess at what they mean is that after you've used the welder on 120 volt power, once you've unplugged it and turned it off, you're supposed to let it sit for a few minutes before plugging it into 240 volts. That would be pretty strange, and it would be a shame if failing to wait long enough actually caused damage. First of all, the tag isn't even clear in its instruction, plus the tag literally fell off in my hands while I was setting the welder on the bench, so it would be very easy to simply miss this apparently important instruction. Maybe after my testing, I'll ignore my guess of what those instructions are telling me and see what happens. The welder comes with a fairly standard MIG gun that has a Euro-style connection, and it uses common 11 series contact tips. It does come with an electrode holder for stick welding, and it's the same cheapest possible electrode holder and cheapest possible cabling that comes with a lot of these Chinese welders. The work clamp is similar to what most of these welders come with in that it is stamped steel, but it does have copper jaws and a copper strap. However, this clamp is flimsier than most. It is super thin steel, and it feels like it might buckle and fold in half when I squeeze it. I'm sure it'll work, but it is super chintzy. It also comes with a fairly standard gas hose, so that should get you going. However, it does not actually come with a gas pressure regulator flow meter, so you will need to get one of those if you're going to run anything other than stick welding or gasless flux core. The welder doesn't come with any wire, but it does come with a knurled roller for flux core and a couple of extra contact tips. Interestingly, or strangely, depending on how you look at it, it also comes with some Teflon tape, like to seal threads, which is weird because on the back of the welder it actually has an O-ring, and the Euro connector all uses O-rings, so I'm not really sure why it comes with Teflon tape, but it does. One really strange thing about this welder and other Yeswelder products from what I've seen is that even though this is a dual voltage welder, it has a standard 120 volt style plug on the end of the cord. So rather than using a 240 volt plug and adapting it when running off of 120 volts, they actually just use a standard 120 volt plug and adapt it when using 240 volts. This would likely not meet any type of regulatory certifications because this style plug isn't technically rated for 240 volts, but more importantly, the adapter that it comes with, when plugged into the wall, would easily allow someone to plug a 120 volt device into 240 volt power. So that's definitely something you want to be careful of if you get one of these, and it just seems like a strange way to do this, even though it will work. On the back of the welder, you can see the power switch and the relatively small fan. The fan does run all the time, and it's pretty loud if you care about such things. The gas inlet fitting does not have a tapered seat. Instead, it opts for a small O-ring, which should work fine. The door of the welder was a bit caved in when the welder arrived, even though the box that it came in was undamaged. The door was kind of jammed shut, and once I managed to get it open, it wouldn't reclose. So it was a little bit bent up when I first got it. I was able to work the door and the case around the door back into shape, and it's fine now, but it was a little bent up when I got it. The wire feed mechanism seems fine, but I find it annoying that the door opening isn't quite big enough to allow easy access to the wire drive. it makes it a little bit fiddly to change the drive roller because the case is in the way. The controls of the welder are a bit unique. When in MIG mode, the default is a synergic mode where you apparently just adjust the amperage rather than the wire feed speed. This basically amounts to the same thing, but it displays amperage rather than feet per minute of wire feed speed. And when you adjust the amperage, the voltage adjusts automatically. Now you can cycle through and tweak the voltage up or down slightly manually, but you can't adjust it completely independently. Alternatively to that mode, you can switch to a material thickness setting. When you change that setting, which is set in millimeters, the voltage and amperage is set automatically according to what thickness setting you choose. There's also an inductance setting, which seems to be able to be changed independently of the other settings. So the welder does have a fair amount of adjustability, but it all feels slightly constrained within the various automatic settings. There's no mode where you can simply set the wire speed and voltage independently. As for other settings, you can pick 2T and 4T modes. You can also switch between standard MIG, MIG with CO2 gas, gasless flux core, stick, and TIG modes. There are two other buttons. The button that says gas just opens the gas valve, presumably to purge the shielding gas, and this other button here simply runs the wire feed. Normally a button like this would be pretty handy for feeding the wire back through after you change wire, but this one doesn't actually run at full speed. It just runs at whatever the wire feed speed setting is. So it doesn't really offer much benefit over simply pulling the trigger on the gun to feed the wire. So overall, these buttons aren't super helpful, but they're fine. The welder claims 160 amps of output on 120 volts and 205 amps of output on 240 volts. So far, if it works like it should, it seems like a lot of welder for $300 or so that it cost when I got this one before the holidays. It looks like it's currently priced around $370. But after all that, let's get it set up and see how it does. Okay, so I've done quite a bit with this welder now, so let's talk about what I found. I did try swapping back and forth between 120 and 240 volts multiple times without waiting, and nothing bad happened. That doesn't guarantee nothing will ever happen if you do this, but that little warning label on the power cord wasn't exactly clear, so who knows. Next, be careful when using the little wire feed button on the front of the welder, because it is not a cold wire feed. The wire becomes live with 76 volts when you push that button. So be mindful that you don't do a little unexpected welding in the background while you're holding that button down. It turns out the work clamp jaws are not copper, they're actually just copper-plated steel. I went and checked a couple other clamps that have come with cheap welders I've reviewed in the past, and found that many of those were just copper-plated steel as well. I feel a little silly for not realizing that before now, but there you go. The metal of the clamp is paper thin, and it's starting to buckle pretty bad already, just from the pressure of the spring. The electrode holder isn't as bad, but it's still pretty cheap. The screws holding it together actually protrude into the jaws, so that depending on which groove in the jaw you use, the rod will actually rest against those screws rather than into the grooves of the jaws. Yeswelder claims the clamp and electrode holder are rated for 300 amps. Color me skeptical. The cables themselves are around 5.5 feet long, and they felt conspicuously light to me. At first I thought maybe the conductor inside was just thinner than it said on the cable, but I stripped some of the insulation back, and it turns out it's aluminum wire, which is why it's so light. Aluminum isn't as strong as copper, and it doesn't carry as much current for a given size. It's also much cheaper, which explains why they use it. And as is typical with the cheap cables that come with these type of welders, the insulation melts very easily. All of this stuff can be replaced, and it technically works, but just understand that the cables, clamp, and electrode holder it comes with are extremely cheap. The welder works with 4 and 8-inch spools of wire. I saw reviews on Amazon that said it didn't work with the smaller spools. I'm not sure if Yeswelder changed something, but they work fine in my welder. The welder comes with 2 drive rollers, one knurled for flux core, and one smooth for solid wire. Both have grooves for 0.35 and 0.30 inch wire. The markings on the rollers are kind of opposite from what I'm used to. The roller has markings on it, but instead of installing it so that the marking facing out indicates which groove is being used, you have to install the roller with the markings for the size you want facing in towards the machine. Not a problem, just opposite from what I'm used to. When running MIG on 120 volts, the output maxes out at 160 amps as claimed. That's impressive output when running on 120 volts, but it does draw over 40 amps from the supply circuit at that point, so it'll trip a 20 amp breaker quick if you do anything other than very short welds. When running on 120 volts, the automatic settings seem a bit low on voltage. It helps to manually adjust the voltage up a bit. Speaking of that voltage adjustment, it can be set from -10 to +10, but it's just an arbitrary offset number. So +10 doesn't give you 10 extra volts, for example. That setting seems to actually give a max range of around ±3 or 4 volts, depending on the rest of the settings. When running on 240 volts using standard C25 gas and 030-inch wire, it runs relatively smooth without having to tweak the automatic settings. Unfortunately, while the settings do go to 205 amps, it will not give more than 160 amps with 030 wire, no matter what I did with the settings. I switched out to 035-inch wire, and when the welder was set for 035-inch wire, I was again unable to get more than 160 amps out of the welder. While still running 035-inch wire, I tried changing the welder setting to 030-inch so I could kind of trick it into giving me more wire feed speed. Of course, at that point, the wire feed speed was way too fast, and I had to set the voltage at +10 to get it to run kind of smooth without just stubbing and popping. But once I did that, it did finally provide over 160 amps. It actually maxed out at 215 amps. Unfortunately, it really didn't like running this way, and it would occasionally start popping and stuttering, and then smooth out again. So this method can be used to get over 160 amps out of this welder, but it may not run consistently. I did some welding with CO2 shielding gas on the CO2 setting with 030-inch wire. With this setup, the automatic settings gave too much voltage. It wasn't smooth and had a ton of spatter. But with the voltage turned down to -3 or 4 and the inductance turned up to 5, it ran better. It might have smoothed out even more with additional adjustment, but just know it will at least run acceptably using 100% CO2. In terms of stick welding, it's fine. The arc is smooth and the setting on the display actually is relatively close to the actual output provided, so that's nice. It's basic with no hot start or arc force, but it works. I ran some 6013, 7014, 6011, and 7018, and it ran them all without any issues. I didn't do any TIG welding with this welder, but I'm sure it'll be pretty much like any other scratch start setup. You will need to get a torch, and you'll need one with a valve because this welder has no way to use the gas connection for TIG welding. In the end, this welder is a very mixed bag. It's a multifunction machine that MIG welds, works with 100% CO2, stick welds okay, can scratch start TIG, and it costs less than $400. So on the face, it represents a pretty strong value. But on the other hand, it's not going to win any quality awards, especially when it comes to the included accessories. It also won't provide anywhere near the rated amperage when using the intended settings. If you trick the settings to get full output, it doesn't always run reliably. The restrictive and generally inconsistent nature of the automatic settings is also kind of a bummer. The Yeswelder website claims a 1-year limited warranty for this welder, but that's all it says. Just that there is a limited 1-year warranty. I can find no details in writing on their website or in the product manual that gives the terms and conditions of the warranty. So there's nothing about the process or procedure for acquiring warranty repair, nothing about what's covered, what's excluded, anything like that. So if you ever need warranty service, you'll have to contact the company and hope for the best. Hopefully they'll take care of any issues, but there doesn't seem to be a specific policy in writing, so it's hard to say for sure. So overall, it works, it's versatile, it's relatively inexpensive, but it has enough quirks and issues that I can't feel super enthusiastic about it. Hopefully that was helpful for anyone interested in this welder. If nothing else, you should have some idea of how it works and what to expect if you decide to give it a shot. If you have any questions or if there's anything else you'd like me to test out with this welder, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching. Take care.